Hello everybody, welcome back to Loom Keeps. Today we are going to talk about the Baby Raccoon switch from Gateron. They are really going all in with this baby stuff. I wonder when the adult raccoon and kangaroos are going to come into play, but for now we have the Baby Raccoon. So let's take a look at this switch and let's talk a little bit about the Baby Raccoon. This is a PC top housing, nylon bottom housing, and it's a palm stem, which is a pretty typical material design choice. What is interesting though is it's got a long spring as well as a long pole, so it's kind of a twist on the classic material type choices. In terms of the design, it's quite pleasing, pretty understated in terms of a kind of almost like a grayish color for the stem. The housing, as always, is very clear, so nice design there from Gateron in terms of keyboards that want to use any LEDs. They also have this new design on some of these switches, similar to the Azure Dragon V2, where they've got this kind of almost a diffuser, transparent diffuser here that sticks through to try to kind of bring more of the LED light up top. And as we mentioned before, palm stem is a long pole version, and this reduces the travel to 3.6 millimeters. But as far as I can tell, the actuation point is still the same as the standard Gateron switches. The activation point isn't published for this, but I did some measuring of where it would activate in terms of these little legs, because that's really the activation point. It's the little legs here. It seems to be similar to the other Gateron switches. So I would assume it's about 2 millimeters on the activation point. A lot of people have this misconception that long pole switches by default activate earlier, but that's not actually true, because the pole itself is long, but your activation point doesn't activate based on the pole. The activation point is from these little feet right here. Right? That's what pushes the spring, the leaf spring, forward and activates the switch. So I'll show you real quick. All right, if I put this together, all right, do you see how this is pressing against the leaf spring? And I push it down. That's where the leaf spring activates. So the leaf spring activation happens from this little feet. So just because it's long pole doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to activate earlier. It could, but not always. So the only difference with this having a long pole would be the travel of 3.6 millimeters, which basically means that it's going to bottom out about 0.4 millimeters earlier than your standard switch, which have a full travel of 4 millimeters. The other part that could also change is the sound of the bottom out could be different, because depending on the housing design, you could either bottom out with the stem poking the bottom, or you could bottom out by this part right here, basically the bottom of your stem housing right here that touches the bottom of the housing. So one of the two things will come in contact with the bottom housing and cause that bottom out sound. So depending on the switch design, it would change what the bottom out sound looks like. It's hard for us to see whether or not the stem is bottom out at first or the sides are bottoming out first, because this bottom housing is opaque. I can't really tell. But we're going to use this to basically test against some of the other switches with a similar material structure to get a feeling for that. Next up, we have the spring. It's a gold spring. It's not a two-stage spring, but it is a long spring. It's got a spring weight of 67 grams and an operation force of about 55 grams. So slightly on the heavier side, still pretty kind of middle of the road. So we should expect kind of a switch that feels pretty normal here. Now, talked a little bit about this long pole design. What we're going to do today is we're going to compare this against two switches that have a very similar material. So the first one is the Gateron G Pro. It's got the exact same material choices in terms of PC, nylon, and palm. And the second one that we're going to be looking at is the Jaywick Yellow, which also has that same material blend. Now obviously materials isn't everything. Design of the switch, tolerances of the switch, as well as spring choices and so forth will make a huge difference. So this isn't a full one-to-one comparison between a short pull and a long pull switch, but we thought this would be interesting for us to look at nonetheless. So we put them all into this keyboard right here, and we're going to go through them one by one. So on here, I and K, we have the Baby Raccoon. Over here we have the G Pro, and here you have the JWick Yellow. There are obviously switches in different price ranges, so this could be a good chance for you to hear how switches from each different price ranges sound, even with the same materials, and you can decide for yourself which one you like better. To start, we're going to start with the Baby Raccoon in stock form. Now we're going to have it in looped and film form. It definitely changed the pitch of the sound. It sounds a bit more clear to me in the looped and film form. It's kind of a more crisp, clear sound when you bottom it out. The pitch also changes slightly. Now, we're going to compare that to the G Pro 2.0 in stock form. Lubed. And then the JWick Yellow, stock. Lubed and filmed. So let's compare them across in stock form. To me, the JWick Yellow and the Baby Raccoon sound more similar. The G Pro is a different pitch, but the JWick Yellow is a bit more kind of muddy / scratchy sounding than the Baby Raccoon. So let's try that one more time. Yeah, there's a slight pitch difference as well. In terms of G Pro, definitely a different pitch as well, slightly more subdued kind of sound coming from the G Pro. I think the Baby Raccoon to my ears sounded the most kind of clear. It's got a very nice, crisp sound to it in terms of the looped and film form. So to me, they're all three different pitches, right? If I go from here, the Raccoon is the highest pitched, followed by the JWick, followed by the G Pro. Right? G Pro is a kind of most lower pitch sounding switch. It's not what I call a deep sounding switch. It's kind of middle of the road. So it depends on what kind of sound you like, I guess. But I do hear improvement in the looped and film form for all three. So that's very interesting that, you know, three switches with exactly the same material choices can sound so different. To me, I personally like the Baby Raccoon. I think the sound is the most sharp and clean versus the other two. But depending on the pitch of the sound, I think that is a personal preference and choice that you have as well. In terms of the feel of the switch, this is because it's the long pull, I can slightly feel the kind of earlier bottom out. I think the feeling is a bit more, I think sharp is the word I'm looking for. It's kind of a very sturdy feeling, because I think, in my hypothesis is that the pole is the one that's bottoming out, so the feeling is the pole touching the bottom of the housing. It's one contact, one motion, so it's got a very solid feel to it. Whereas for these, on the normal switches, the bottoming out is actually happening on both sides of the stem, right? So a lot of times it's the two sides of the stem, right here and right there, bottoming out. So depending on the stem wobble and I guess kind of how lopsided the switch is at the moment, it could be a single contact, or it could be like a double contact, if you will, right? One side touches first earlier than the other side, and so the feeling itself is not as crisp and clean. That being said, it is a bit more of a, it's not cushioned is not the word I'm looking for, but less solid of a bottom out. So if you want to be a bit softer on your fingers, The kind of short pole version seems to be softer feeling, whereas the long pole is definitely a much more solid, abrupt feeling. So it depends on what kind of feeling you would like. That's the feeling difference that I can tell from these. So that's the Baby Raccoon. I think it's actually quite an interesting switch. Some people like short throw switches. I'm personally not one of those people, but I know a lot of gamers like short throw switches as well. The difference here, though, if you're a gamer, is this doesn't necessarily have a shorter activation point. So if you're one of those that are looking for those super fast switches that activates like on a hair's brush, this might not be it. This is more for people that are looking for a short throw switch, but has a normal activation point, and it also has a very nice sound to it. So that's the Baby Raccoon. Let me know what you think. What did you think of the 3 switches here? They are all made of same materials. Are you surprised that they sound so different? Or are you not surprised at all? Which one do you like better? Do you think the Baby Raccoon is worth the price difference compared to the other 2 switches? Do visit lumekeeps.com for our selection of all of these switches. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next time.